Hello and welcome to ATARC's After Lunch IT webinar series this week, and we are here on a Tuesday. Today, IT topic experts will discuss the tools and processes used to achieve and improve cybersecurity compliance. You will also hear what these federal IT executives are doing to reduce risk and data exposure in their organization by verifying trust in the federal government supply chain. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I am the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. So I would first like to welcome all of our attendees, and a special thanks to Jackie Biro, Stephanie Shepard, Sebastian Dunn, and the rest of the Red Hat team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, which will then be followed by a Q&A where we will pop in a few polls and then answer your questions. So before we begin, I want to encourage the audience to submit those questions in the Q&A section of this platform, and we will be going through them during this panel. So please send them in as we go. To start us off, I want to introduce our panelists. And actually, if our panelists could go ahead and come on camera right now, and you can go ahead and unmute yourselves before we forget. Let me read off your names, and if you can maybe just give a wave to the camera. First, we have Ted Akata, who is the Chief Technology Officer over at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We also have Kenneth Clark, who is the Chief Data Officer and Assistant Director at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Next, we have Kathleen Kaplan, who is the Chief Data Officer at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And last but not least, we have Sebastian Dunn, who is the Principal Solution Architect over at Red Hat. So we have got a great panel today, and I'm so excited to dive right into it. But maybe to start things off, we could have each panelist share a little bit more information about themselves, what they're currently working on, and anything that you think the audience should know as it relates to this topic. So Ted, do you mind starting us off, please?
Sure. No, it's a privilege to have my colleague, Kathleen Kaplan, who's the Chief Data Officer here at FEMA. She's currently actually full on with the vaccination effort. And as you know, this is the President's highest priority. And so we are absolutely mobilized on that with 100 vaccination sites in 100 days. Just in Texas, we approached, I think, 100,000 vaccinations and well exceeded that. And something like 10,000, 11,000 vaccinations per day. So it's, I think one of the locations was the Texas Motor Speedway. So that's a good metaphor for the pace that we're actually operating on. So that in a nutshell is where we are currently operationally. And of course, we have a wide footprint on a number of technologies that Dr. Kaplan and I share, but I'll just leave that as a highlight.
Excellent. Maybe that's a good segue then for an intro for Dr. Kaplan.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Kaplan. As Ted said, we work together, so I was surprised he was on the call with me here. I'm the Chief Data Officer, and I'm also the Enterprise Analytics Division Director. And I got to say to the audience, we're hiring. So look at the jobs out there on USA Jobs and definitely apply. We have a great mission at FEMA. We help people before, during, and after disasters. I mean, who wouldn't want to be part of that mission? Currently, though, I am what we call, you could say I'm detailed to my headquarters, which is the Department of Homeland Security, which Kenneth Clark is with us in. And I'm deployed there, we call it deployed. So I'm detailed there, working, as Ted said, on the Operation Vaccinate Our Workforce task force. And you can imagine with close to about 300,000 employees, getting everybody vaccinated is key, because the jobs that we do, we have to go out in the field at times, and we have to work with all different types of people. And so vaccinating our workforce has to be key to protect our staff. And so that's it in a nutshell. You can imagine all the data that's included with all that. So that's it for me right now.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. And next, I would like to hear from Kenneth.
Thank you, Kirsten. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back. Yeah, I've been the CDO at ICE for a little over a year now, but I've also been the Assistant Director for Information Governance and Privacy. So that's the privacy mission, records and data management, Freedom of Information Act and information governance. So, as Kathleen and Ted have been talking about, a big mission there on the COVID side. Needless to say, on the ICE side, a lot of work that we're doing, with the immigration activities that are going on, the work that's been going on with the immigration bill, executive orders, and we're really taking a mission-driven approach to how we're dealing with a number of the initiatives that we have here at ICE. We're developing, for example, a data inventory of over 50 systems that we've got. And really, I think that's an important point of really knowing your data, because there tends to be lack of consistent definitions and usage and how you protect your data. And you really have to have that consistency with standards and identity, credentialing, access management, standards-driven security models. So we're really trying to define that through our data inventory initiative, and really clarifying our metadata. That's going to be driving how we're going to be able to search for data. But then also putting in good management practices, configuration management discipline. Whether you document and then you also deal with a very transparent change process when you have to bring new data in or share it with other partners. And we have a number of partners that we work with. And so it's important to maintain the quality and how you change that and move that data. So again, it's DHS is a very unique organization where we have so many different mission areas, but we also work very closely together. And that's one of the things that's great about the chief data officers at the Department of Homeland Security. We work together, we share and collaborate. So looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you. And then over to you, Sebastian.
So good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Sebastian Dunn. I'm a principal solution architect here at Red Hat, and I've been supporting the scientific and civilian agencies within the U.S. government for going on into my 6th year at this point. And previous to that, I was assistant administrator and network administrator and IT director for many years before that. And we're very pleased to have FEMA and DHS as our customers and helping them with, as Kenneth said, it's their job. They know their data better than anybody. And once they identify the security requirements of that data, the locations of that data, how they want to protect that data, then we're eager to help them, use automation to accomplish that protection and keep that protection in place. So I think that's where you're going to see the conversation go today, and I think it's a very important topic.
Excellent, thank you. So for our first question, I'd actually like to hear from each panelist. How did COVID-19 impact or accelerate cybersecurity efforts within your agency? Maybe we can go back to Ted to kick us off.
Yeah, well, so, a lot of the work of FEMA is actually interagency. First and foremost, our mission is to support our state partners, the governors, their state emergency directors, local cities, tribal territorial governments. We have, some 400 tribal agreements. We have a tribal liaison unit, and these are sovereign nations in Indian country. We have a fairly large footprint going all the way to Guam and to Truk and Tinian and the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas Islands, going all the way to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Not much different from ICE. I mean, ICE has a global footprint. Just about every embassy around the world has an ICE location. And so not only are we sharing within FEMA and within the federal family, but we have a mission to share data to our state, local, tribal, territorial governments, and, oh, by the way, nonprofits, right? So everybody from the Red Cross all the way to those doing disaster relief. So that makes it an extraordinarily complex mission to actually prepare the data and ensure that we protect privacy and the assurances are there. And, and that's a big part of Dr. Kaplan's job. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to her to say a little bit more if you'd like to.
Sure. The pandemic hit us very hard, right? So it hit the nation very hard. And because we're all DHS on this call, Ken and Ted and I, DHS is the Homeland Security. We have to protect our nation. That's our mission. So when the pandemic hit, we had to quickly get everybody in line and try to figure out data-wise what even like we were going to call this. Ken and I both sit on the DHS Chief Data Officer Council. It's the Data Governance Council. And so some of the issues that came up not only within DHS, but across government wide, it was basically like, what are we even going to call this? What are the meta tags we're going to use? Are we going to call it coronavirus? Are we going to call it COVID? Are we going to call it COVID-19 and so forth? I mean, if you think about just even that simple question, that has to be agreed upon. So one good thing that came out of the pandemic, we can say, is we did a lot more coordination across government-wide. And I'm on a lot of COVID government-wide groups with other chief data officers. And so we are now we did put standards in place so that from now on, the lead agency will determine those metadata tags. So we'll leave it up, like if FEMA's in charge, then FEMA's going to make all the metadata tags, and then the other government agencies will have to follow. But that also requires rapid response, right? So we can't let anybody else get ahead of us. So that's just one good thing that came out of the pandemic. And I'll throw it over to Ken now.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Kathleen. It's hard to believe it's been a year since we actually went into the full telework mode. Just where did that year go? On that day where we shifted over, I mean, we went 100% telework and got together with, all the various offices had their own processes to get their teams together. I mean, we actually saw productivity rates going up, particularly on our Freedom of Information Act side, over 25%. So, but, as far as being prepared, I mean, my hat's off to all the chief information officers across the department. And, Rochelle Henderson, who's our CIO at ICE, was just, her team was just incredible in pulling the infrastructure needs that we had to be able to operate under the COVID environment. And that was really across the board with, the entire department and all the components and their CIOs, just to pull the infrastructure. So we had the teleconferencing capability, as we're doing now, the ability to share our files, to access our files. Very, a daunting task, but the information technology community really came together on that one. But also just the processes of business processes of working together. Actually, at ICE, the transformation of moving into more of a mobile and agile operating organization already started really even before COVID. I think COVID forced us into having that model of remote access and teleworking. But we've already been looking at how we're going to be able to move in the new era of trying to increase efficiencies, but accept the fact that we're around the world. We need mobile access, mobile abilities, but also looking at how to be doing smart investments. And some of that investments means looking at where your real estate and infrastructure costs are. If you have people that are able to telework or work in maybe a cafe type setting where you're rotating people in, that can save a lot of costs that organizations have. So in a lot of ways, there was plans already as far as how we wanted to transform ourselves, but then also we pulled together after COVID, and I think we've made a lot of progress, and we've got a lot of lessons learned across the team. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And then Sebastian, I'd like to hear from you as well on this.
So you can imagine that the government agencies we support have all been coming to us with new important requirements that have been driven by COVID-19, and chief among them are flexibility. They want to be able to develop new applications or change the applications they have to adapt to the changing requirements that seem to be coming every day, right? New variants of the virus, new vaccines coming out, all sorts of changes happening, and our IT systems need to be flexible enough to handle those. So that's been one primary requirement. A second, I would say, is the ability to then deploy those changes. Ted mentioned how geographically disparate, our reach is across the world, and we have to be able to, in an automated way and in an accurate way, get these changes into systems all across the country and even into the Pacific. And then there's the security requirements. There's so much data now being collected, and a lot of that data needs to be protected. A lot of that data has PII type information in it that we need to be careful of. Obviously we want to use that data, we want to get the value out of the data, but we can't do it in a way that releases people's personal information. So we've been working very closely with our government partners to make sure that we're, helping them with those changes to their systems and their data.
Definitely. Right. Thank you. So I think it's time for our first poll question, which will dovetail into our next couple questions, actually. And that is, what is the biggest challenge of managing these or machine identities across hybrid cloud environments that your agency is facing? So if our audience and our panelists feel free to answer as well. And the options include security, lack of resources, compliance, governance, or other. So if everyone could just take a couple seconds and give that an answer. And Alyssa, whenever you feel like we have had an adequate amount of responses, we can go ahead and throw those results up, and then we can talk about it. All right, so looks like compliance is the highest. Security is not too far behind. So my question for the panelists is two parts to it. What type of cybersecurity authentication changes and innovations has your agency incorporated due to the need to manage a large number of machine identities? And with that, what are some of those unique challenges of managing these machine identities? So I want to hear from you guys about what your response looked like to that poll question. Ted, can you please start us off?
Sure, yeah, because I'm in the IT cone. Kathleen actually comes out of the policy planning unit, but I work for the CIO. So look, I'm grateful that security and governance are roughly equal in the poll, and that compliance is ahead, but not as much. I think I'll rephrase the compliance question in terms of the theme of this whole conversation, this webinar, which is automation. Okay, so let me start there. Governance is really critical, of course, and security, trying to ensure our system boundaries are secure, and we're testing them and so forth. But the compliance issue is really interesting, because it's not that we are not complying. It's a lot of the policies, in fact, and the sort of the scaffolding to make it automated, particularly for the new world of cloud computing and development security, or secure development operations, or DevOps or DevSecOps, however you want to phrase that, are there. So for example, everything that we do in the government is really policy-based, right? Even these controls that we use to protect data, to protect privacy, come out of NIST. And so there are these emerging standards like NIST, OSCAL, for example, and OSCAL is now, trying to dig deeper into cabinet level department approaches to compliance, right? So you've got, I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of numbers. I've been, I think, in the government only 8 years. It's scary that I actually remember these numbers, right? The 853 NIST controls, the 4300A common controls, and there's a whole bunch of people working on this, from MITRE to FedRAMP to GSA to other folks in DHS, Border Patrol, the DHS CIO shop, a whole bunch of people. But the bottom line is this: the common controls in the sort of, I would say, in the existing paradigm of client server hub and spoke computing, which are still with us, even with cloud computing, right? Those controls are fast becoming antiquated, right? Some of the controls are something like this. Do you have a fire extinguisher do you have halon gas, right? These are things that you would not ask Microsoft Azure and their team there, or AWS. Do you have fire extinguishers, right? Those kinds of things need to be effectively brought into a clear definition for each cabinet level department. And thus those things can then be automated. The department is also working on automating this so that through APIs, we can effectively talk to these sort of authorizing engines and generate what are called system security plans and so forth, so that we can actually standardize them in an open sort of text-based language. So that was a little bit more technical than I wanted to talk about, but effectively compliance comes down to that. If you can't measure things, you can't manage them. You can't manage them, you can't scale them, you can't repeat them. They're not repeatable, manageable, sustainable, or scalable. So getting that sort of denominator of what the standard is what the department and a whole bunch of people, both at our level through at FEMA, in a lot of CIO shops, as well as the department, we're all sort of really on full throttle to actually get that clarified, because then that gets us to really cool things where the data is on the edge, and there is, in fact, no center, right? We have edge-based computing. You've probably heard that term before, edge computing. There is no center. And the kinds of things that enable it, like zero trust networking, that we assume breach in every network. Those kinds of concepts are going to be what drive us forward to be a lot more flexible with the data. So I'm able to create the architecture and the engineering that supports Dr. Kaplan's efforts, right, to actually accomplish some of the mission around data.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you for that response. Kathleen, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Sure, I knew Ted was going to say the zero trust architecture. Because I had come to FEMA from Commerce and I was under NIST. So I'm well familiar with all the controls that come down from NIST, the requirements. So anyway, in the poll though, I clicked the least one. Well, one of the least ones, the lack of resources and expertise. And only because I think that at FEMA, we kind of have everything under control pretty good. I mean, the CIO shop is awesome. We have the data governance, a really strong data governance council that Ted's partner, Jack Montgomery, is my helper on it. And we work together on, leading it. And so that's under control. The issue that pops up, and why I said at the beginning, like look at FEMA for jobs, because the technology has changed so quickly, government hiring does not change as quickly, right? And so sometimes it's hard to get very qualified people who could wait the process out to hire it. Luckily at FEMA, we do have other ways to hire, and we have this thing called core, which is basically, a temporary position kind of designation. But because there is no, like, let's say there's no like data steward series in the government. There's these series that we need, but they don't exist. So we have to use other ways to try to figure out how to hire people into these different type of positions that didn't exist, but really should exist. And so we do some kind of finagling sometimes, and we try to put the ads out such that we could get the people that we need. But anyway, that was my comment. But no, at FEMA, luckily, knock on wood, I think that we're working very well together, and we have a good handle on a lot of these issues. So that's why I picked that one.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective with us. And Kenneth, how about you?
Yeah, I really, as Ted was talking, I mean, from our standpoint, looking at security, because I mean, we all, from our side, we have sensitive investigative and enforcement data. We all have to deal with personally identifiable information. There's critical, sensitive, protected critical infrastructure information that's out there. So I think, having that identity, being able to verify the identity of users and that have access to the systems and the data is crucial. I mean, it's, attribution is something it's very important. And, because one of the things then as you're looking at essentially your data and your systems, you need to have the trust based on the need to know. Now, I know with a lot of the information sharing, there's the emphasis on the need to share, but I think you ought to be looking at the need to share with a very deliberative approach, and knowing who you're sharing with, and mapping out what the scenarios or what the requirements are for the information sharing. That's what, for example, that's one of the areas that we're looking at right now is with healthcare information that we have that needs to be shared with other agencies. Let's look at the process. Let's look at who needs to have access to the data. Let's map it out. Let's make sure that it's clear in our metadata who owns what parts of the data, what aspects of the data that's being shared. We also even tag in our inventory whether the data sets that we're working with should be open government data. Again, we have very sensitive data, just as other agencies have across the federal government. So, being able to identify that data and tag it, identifying what kind of restrictions we have, whether that system's, for example, national security system, that information that needs to be protected. So really, again, that goes back to really one of my first point is really getting to know your data, and not, it sounds like a cliche, know your data, but really that fundamentally is what's important, and that will drive a lot of the other activities that you put in.
Great, thank you. And Sebastian, from an industry perspective, what are some of your thoughts?
Sure. So I think it would be useful to talk about how automation and security automation in particular, and automating compliance has really changed in just the last 10 years, because the changes have been really dramatic. I mean, in many ways, we're sort of in a golden age for IT and security automation right now. And here's why. It used to be, I mean, we as security administrators and system administrators and network engineers, we wanted to impose these security baselines, but it was really, really hard. I mean, you literally would download, 100-page manuals from NIST and print them out and go through them page by page, and then attempt to manually change your systems and your networking and everything else to meet those security baselines. So as you can imagine, not only was that a difficult manual process in many ways, it was also error prone, right? I mean, I don't care how good you are as an engineer or as a system administrator, having to change that many systems, mistakes are going to be made. And then systems can drift out of compliance after you finish that last change, right? So that's another thing you have to take into consideration. Well, within the last 10 years in the open source community, and Red Hat, of course, is an open source community, it's an open source company. I love to be able to talk about this. But the open source community said, wait a second, instead of writing these security baselines as human readable text, why don't we write them instead in some sort of language that machines can understand and then automate against? And so that's what happened. The industry created, the open source community created something called SCAP, S-C-A-P. For the Security Content Automation Protocol. And now all of those baselines are provided by NIST. You can, name any of them, 802, the DISA STIG, the DCI DSS, PCI DSS baseline, all of them now are in this SCAP format, which means it's easy to not only check your systems, but then use other automation technologies to enforce that on your systems and remediate systems that drift out of compliance. So, again, I really believe we're in a golden age for everybody to be looking at IT automation, not as just something they should be doing for security and compliance, but it's really just a business imperative overall.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So we had a couple of audience questions come through, and I think that these might have been meant for Ted and Kathleen, but our other panelists, please feel free to chime in as well. Someone asked, where does zero trust come in? And Ted, you touched on it, but do you want to elaborate a little bit further?
Yeah, so this idea of zero trust really ties into what Sebastian said, and secondarily what Kenneth just mentioned in terms of metadata and so forth, right? Really understanding the data. So this idea is that we are in a world where everybody is the endpoint, right? I have a cell phone right here. We're talking on laptops, but stuff in a cloud container or a Kubernetes cluster is also kind of logically an endpoint if we assume breach, right? And that's the important concept, that I should not be able to trust any single endpoint unless I have both non-repudiation. I think Kenneth mentioned that, right? Do I really know it's from Dr. Kaplan, right? Is there non-repudiation involved? And then is that an immutable channel, right? So do I know that the data I'm getting from Kathleen is in fact the data that comes from her, and I know that identity. So that's a part of that, but there's a much more technical definition. There's a really great O'Reilly book on it, on control planes and data planes. So just go read that book. That's the canonical reference, came out like 8 years ago or something like that. But suffice it to say, getting back to the point of everything is on the edge, and to talk to the edge is a little bit of what Sebastian said, with SCAP and SCAP and OSCAL and these standards, whatever it is, it's got to be in a machine consumable format. And to a point that I just want to tie it to my colleagues here. When Kenneth mentioned something about metadata, that's really important, because the way you then communicate is through API. And any software developer will tell you, you can't actually write in software an API without metadata. Metadata drives an API. You can't really do an API without metadata. So those standards that go, that my colleagues, that Dr. Kaplan are sort of formulating with the Data Governance Council at FEMA, that metadata is not just sort of static and it just sits there. That's almost like the nouns, right? They're nouns. It's the standard how you name a warehouse or a runway or a vaccination facility, quite frankly, or a medical facility or something like that. Those are really key, because until we standardize the metadata, and we're looking at standards like the modified Dublin Core and their concepts like that, but we need the verbs, right? The verbs are like the APIs. So we can't have a complete sentence without both nouns and verbs. So the metadata really is essential to constructing the APIs. You can have the code for the API. You can use GraphQL or TypeScript and interfaces like that, but they by themselves aren't going to solve that problem unless you in fact have the metadata. So that's a huge part. The identity part is then the next step. We like to say, when it comes to automated containers, we haven't really talked a lot about containers. Containers have to be role-based, immutable, and least privileged, right? So in other words, the future is not this thing where it's an all or nothing access to a particular system. We're going to have much more fine-grained gradients of access, right? You're going to have people writing code, whether it's analytics code in Python or R or something like that, being able to put a workload in the cloud, accessing just in time a specific piece of data, no more or no less, authorized for that one individual user. So I think what you're going to find is a future where you're not having this sort of very finite system count within federal agencies, but in fact, you're going to have a lot more workloads that are in a continuous process of deployment, a continuous process of automation. And the fruit of that is actually being able to get more work done and fewer obstacles to sort of unleash the brilliance of the analysts that we're about to hire. We need smarter people in FEMA. We need to recruit, come join FEMA, as Kathleen said. But we want to be able to match the infrastructure and the data engineering with the new generation of highly skilled folks coming into the FEMA workforce. And they are very skilled. I've seen a lot of these young kids coming into FEMA. They're coming in with graduate degrees in statistics, data analytics, and they're very impressive, actually.
Excellent, thank you. Do any of our other panelists want to chime in before we jump to the next question?
I wanted to say something about zero trust. I'm glad we brought it up, and I'm glad, Ted, you brought it up a couple times, zero trust and edge. Zero trust in particular is interesting because it's not a product. People can't go out, agencies can't go out and buy zero trust. It's really a new way of securing the intercommunication within your existing networks and systems. And again, I think there's, the only way that I can see to really do that is to ensure that all those endpoints are secured the right way. And the only way to do that across hundreds and thousands of systems is through some sort of IT automation. And again, as I said, that's now possible. So yeah, zero trust is it's a big buzzword these days, and there's a lot of sort of misinformation around it. I'm sure there are people planning to monetize it, but I think the secret again is to know your systems and know how to configure your systems, and then do it in the smartest way possible, which is through automation of some sort. And then edge really continues that idea. So, you know, edge computing is real. This is how the telecommunications companies are rolling out their 5G networks today. You know, the endpoints they're deploying, and you know see on communications towers and such, are really, you know, those are edge computing devices handling huge amounts of data, and flexible IT systems, including things like containers that Ted was talking about. And then we've got the challenge of not only are we managing perhaps hundreds of thousands of endpoints, but we have to protect the data on those hundreds of thousands of endpoints in some way. And there's no way to do that other than through smart automation of those systems.
Definitely. Thank you. Oh, Kenneth, you just came off mute. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to also add, you know, it's really exciting what's going on with biometrics too. I mean, you know, with my phone, you know, I get into my phone with facial recognition. You know, it's and we do, you know, of course, when we come across, get off the airplane and come into the country, you know, biometrics there are verifying identities. So I mean, it's, and then and even rapid DNA and some of the areas that's going on to identify the identity of individuals. I think that's an area that's going to be very interesting to see how it moves into, again, addressing access to systems, access to data as we move forward.
Excellent, thank you. So moving on to another audience question, our friend Jason Miller over at Federal News Network has a question for Kathleen. He asks if you can talk more about how data is driving the DHS COVID vaccination effort for its workforce.
Sure. So we had the problem of we have close to 300K employees, 300,000 employees. How are we going to vaccinate all these people very quickly? And so what we had to do was we had to discover different lines of effort, and then say like, okay, well, we partner with the Veterans Administration right now, and other organizations too, but the Veterans Administration has been extremely helpful partner in actually administering the vaccines. If staff are close to a VA hospital, then they can go get their vaccine. But it's a whole, you can imagine the scheduling issue. Talk about like, you know, like Disney World scheduling their people coming in and out is the same thing. Like we have all these employees, 2 vaccines at the time, you know, now they came out with a new 1 vaccine, 2 vaccines, scheduling them such that they're 3 weeks apart and all this other stuff. But on top of it, it's voluntary. So we can't really make anybody get the vaccines. We just have to use as much nudge theory as we possibly can to say that this is beneficial to the US, it's beneficial to you, it's beneficial to your family, and hopefully get all our people vaccinated. So because it is voluntary, we put it at 80% cap. Well, a goal, let's say 80%. So we're working towards that, and we're doing a great job, and we have all these other things in place. Now, the other issue now is identifying employees who are not near those sites, or not even near a mass vaccination sites. We call that the Vax Desert. If you're not near a facility, and how are we going to get to those people? How are we going to get to the staff to vaccinate them, or how are they going to get to us? So then you have to like do the trade-off of all the resources and all this other stuff. The data portion is interesting because it's basically all PII, right? So your names, everything, if you got the shot, if you didn't get the shot. So we have to have very stringent controls on that and who has access to it. Of course, our partners that are vaccinating must have access to the people's names and that kind of stuff so they can schedule. And so it becomes a very interesting relationship between the different organizations to ensure that PII, and it's definitely on a need to know basis. It doesn't go out anywhere else. But that's basically what we're doing. We have these different organizations, like Ted knows that we work a lot with ServiceNow to facilitate a lot of this information and to get the information. Then we have a whole different core of people that are just doing dashboards and all this other analytics so that we can figure out our next steps forward. So it is a big challenge, but we're addressing the challenge, and our people will be vaccinated at least by, we believe, September. Everybody will have at least, they're both their shots. And that's it. I don't know if I answered your question. I can't give out too much information. I just want to add another PII thing that when we're talking about it, and Ted knows this and Ken probably knows this too, is that one of the PII issues that FEMA faces is location. Because location could be identifying, but because we're FEMA, we need to get to the people, and we need to have our partners, firemen and so forth, get to the people as well. So we have a lot of interesting issues in DHS as a whole, as far as PII and our mission. And I just want to just throw that out as a comment.
That's a great answer, and we've got great audience questions, so I definitely want to get back into them, but before we run out of time, we need to pop up our next poll so that everyone can get their CPE credit. This poll is, how confident are you that you could rebuild your systems after a ransomware attack? So again, please take a moment to answer. If you are not confident at all, fairly confident, pretty confident, confident, or very confident. So for those at home, please take a moment to answer. Our panelists, please feel free to answer as well, and then we will pop up the results as soon as Alyssa feels like we've gotten enough responses. All right, cool. Let's see here. Fairly confident. Okay. So guess we're confident-ish. But going back to the audience questions, because they just keep coming through, which this is awesome. Let me see here. Where did we leave off? I believe this one was for Ted. I think you mentioned this program, but do you think that the OSD CMMC program is going to help with standards? And if that wasn't you, I apologize, but I think it was.
I think the person was mentioning OSCAL.
Ah, okay.
That's the open, secure, control, access, whatever. There's an L. Yes. Yeah, that's effectively what Sebastian talked about, but it's the broader NIST. I mean, it's industry, it's not just government, it's like the whole universe. It's kind of boiling the ocean. What's relevant actually is just simply, what is the department going to do? Look, I just want to I'll just sneak out of this question by just highlighting what Kenneth mentioned, which is this idea of biometrics. And an important part of zero trust, which then couples with the automation, is the fact that we have non-repudiation, that I really know the data is coming from Kathleen. And so the ability to run analytics to see if that person is really trustworthy. And I'm sure maybe a follow-on question in terms of what everybody's answer, particularly my Kathleen's response about, we got a lot of PII data, and there are a lot of other cabinet departments like HHS or Census have been working on ways to de-identify them. Location data is particularly troublesome, but there are approaches. But now you've got cybersecurity versus whether someone can reconstruct data after being de-identified. And that is not really clear yet in both the literature or in practice. There's some nascent approaches to de-identification, but man, it's just not there yet. And it's not enough almost for CIOs to hang, or other people working on privacy to hang the risk hat on. And I just want to mention that as well. So get out of that question if I could.
Any of our other panelists want to chime in? All right, well, we have plenty of other questions to get through. So let's focus on the AI one. With human error being one of the biggest factors, what are your thoughts about AI and cybersecurity? Sebastian, would you want to start with this one?
Sure, that's a terrific question. And I think we're going to see more and more artificial intelligence used in evaluating events, if you will, to identify, are they really cybersecurity events, or are they something else? So it's definitely coming. There are definitely organizations already using it, but I would even argue you don't even have to go that far yet. Just doing simple automation of your responses to the log information you already have could immediately improve your cybersecurity responsibility. So let me give you a particular example. So for many years as a network engineer for a nonprofit, I had to monitor their firewall logs. And, inevitably at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, there would be some sort of attack from China or somewhere else that we recognized immediately, was not kosher, right? And it took an administrator to get up, get onto his laptop, get onto the VPN, and perhaps change some firewall rules to block that activity from the organization. Well, now all of that can be not only monitored, but then automated. So it doesn't take somebody, a human administrator, to make some basic, simple changes to protect their organization from certain cybersecurity threats. So I think AI is coming. It's going to make that even more sophisticated, but don't feel like you've got to wait for AI and to bring your organization really up to that speed in order to do some really effective things with your cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Any of our other panelists, thoughts on AI and cybersecurity?
I think with AI, it opens up a lot of opportunities to really to be able to look at behaviors, and I'll take it from the insider threat perspective. Looking at places that which databases are being accessed. I mean, there are databases that we have in our agency that it would be inappropriate and would be questionable why I'm going into those databases. And those types of behaviors, and being able to put the necessary security controls based on unusual behavioral activity that you're seeing from the insider side. I mean, artificial intelligence can give some of that, can aid in that. I know that in many ways you're looking at keystrokes and that type of thing has been something that has been one way to monitor insider threat activities. But I think AI could also be looking at just the general behaviors and which systems are being accessed and databases, and making some level of notification if there's some unusual access with somebody that really doesn't have a need or a purpose for going into those repositories.
Great, thank you. So we have another question from Gail, and Kathleen, maybe you'll be a good person to answer this since you mentioned it before with resources. How are you skilling up your IT workforce to support new and emerging technologies? Would you like to elaborate further on that?
Sure. So I lead 3 branches, and these branches need more people. And so I'm constantly trying to beg, borrow, and steal. We have positions from within FEMA. Ted knows this. I think the issue of the different kinds of series is kind of problematic right now, especially for my group, is that the 2210 series, which is IT, this is government talk, are owned all by Ted's shop. They own those. You own those, but other series we can use. Like I'm making a whole power analytics group, and so for this analytics group, I wanted top-notch folks in it, and so I changed the series to be statisticians, which Ted had mentioned. So I have a very nice core of statisticians, Ted, and you can't have them, and you can borrow them, and you can't have them. And so that's one group that we're actually focusing on, and we're trying to use this to forward FEMA in the future as far as analytics. And so these are just some workarounds that we have to do, but I'll let Ted talk now since I mentioned.
Yeah, no, the skills are really important, and in particular analytical skills. I mean, what is that? Plato quoted Socrates, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. And so the challenge is finding people basically who are willing to examine what's happening, right? I mean, this is the curiosity and the passion for the mission, but the curiosity to say, look, I don't want to trust a single pane of glass. That's a cybersecurity issue. There's no one solution that that really is going to solve your problem. So right there, right, that's like Sebastian saying, well, you can just automate stuff. And AI is not going to solve your problem, because the deeper issue is statistical and inferential thinking, right? Do you actually understand how machine learning works and how fundamentally it is statistics and math based? And so, you know, when Kathleen says she's building up that cadre of statistical folks coming in to her shop, that's exactly the foundational understanding. IT can always pick up, you know, and we're going to have to rethink through all of those series, because guess what? The IT folks have to start thinking inferentially as well. They have to start thinking about how to augment their security monitoring tools through statistical inference, right? So that, because the data exhaust is so immense and it's only growing, and the implication is that the only way you can get a handle on that data is by leveraging the smart people we have in Kathleen's group, who understand how to cut through large pieces of data and do fact pattern recognition, right? Patterns, and then coming to inferential understanding based on the size of the data exhaust. And so it has to be a partnership between IT and these the folks that coming out of grad schools that are really armed with the latest in mathematics and statistical understanding, and then applying that to writing code effectively.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Ken, did you have anything you would like to add to that?
No, and that's something that, you know, again, really growing your workforce. And that's something that I agree. You know, we've got, you know, there's a wide range of areas. You got to have the technology, you got to have the policy side, you know, and then, but yeah, I'm with Ted on the statistical side. I mean, that is huge, is being able to have that understanding and that background, because you've got to really bring a multi-dimensional team together to deal with the situation in totality. And that's one of the benefits too of, you know, having a CIO organization and a CDO organization, because the CIO organization can focus on the cybersecurity, the infrastructure needs. You've got the CDO side where you're able to work closely as a peer to the CIO to look at work closely with the business needs, the policy drivers that are in there. And then making sure, again, you got the workforce that can handle both missions.
Certainly. All right, so I think we are about ready for our last poll question. Alyssa, if you could please pop that up on the screen. What are the barriers to automation in your organization? And the answers include shortage of skilled IT personnel, lack of documentation of existing processes, cultural resistance, lack of standards and process expertise, or loss of focus and traction. So I will give the audience a moment to mull those options over. And then we will go ahead and pop up the answers whenever, Alyssa, you feel like we've gotten enough feedback. All right, let's see what we got here. Shortage of skilled IT personnel being the highest, and loss of focus and traction being the least. Very interesting. Any thoughts from our panelists on those answers? Does that resonate, make sense, or surprise anyone?
I, again, voted for the least one, cultural resistance, because people love their Excel spreadsheets in their drawers, right? I mean, that's a big problem. And when you're trying to push some new IT on them and some new concepts and whatever, they can be very resistant. They like what they do, they're comfortable. So you have to try to make sure that you speak in their language and say how much beneficial it's going to be, and the manual labor that's going to be eliminated. So that's what I put.
Excellent.
I'm going to add on that.
Mhm.
In the poll, one of the least voted was loss of traction. And, it's kind of attention deficit because that's a secondary thing. Why do they love spreadsheets? Because a lot of us, our mission span is immense. I mean, FEMA not only does COVID, we are also every Amber Alert and Silver Alert you get on that traffic highway, on the highway, that is generated from something called the Integrated Public Alert Warning System. Okay, and that data comes out of Open FEMA and so forth. We have the largest single policy insurance sort of company in the world. It's called the National Flood Insurance Program. Oh, by the way, we exhausted the entire English alphabet in hurricanes in 2020 last year, and we were well into the Greek names for hurricanes, right? So it's not like in the middle of COVID that somehow the hurricanes don't come, or Mother Nature is giving us a reprieve this year, right? So, and I think part of that is the sort of the cognitive load of actually being in an emergency management organization. Now that's normal, but I think to support what Kathleen was just mentioning, part of that is you can only you get a clean house, you get dinner on the table, clean clothes. I mean, pick one. You can't have them all, right? I'm going to cook tonight, but that's not. It's that I think and I will say something about isolation. There's this whole thing, and if this were last year or next year, I think it'd be a lot easier. But we're all teleworking, right? It's harder to build the relational bridges. It's just harder. Maybe permanent telework is a major part of our future. But I will tell you, the fact that we can't meet at all we can do it now, but before it was highly restricted. And even now there's sort of like challenges in terms of, rapid screening to get in. So there's a little bit of a cost there, but that itself has just made the normal channels of communication much harder already in organizations that have a very large span of control. And that's what makes it challenging. Not just for FEMA, I think it's for every component within DHS. I would imagine it's also in organizations like ICE or Border Patrol or TSA.
Definitely. All right, so I think we probably have time for one more question. This one is an interesting one. Can Ken and Ted talk about edge computing at FEMA and ICE based on what Sebastian mentioned earlier? How are you both preparing for more devices and data at the edge? So maybe Ken, could you kick us off with that one?
Well, I think right now where we're at is first of all, laying out what are the needs that we have and what's the, really what's the requirements across our operating organizations, and then also even our management administration organizations. So that's something with in partnership with the CIO that we're doing as far as what are the systems and where we need to go into the next generation of our infrastructure, but also really making sure that we're essentially identifying what are the new missions that we have going forward. And some of that is, ICE has a new strategic plan. We have a new data strategy. Those are all going to be components on how we're going to map out the direction that we're going. So I know, Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of literature on edge computing. We don't have to really dive into this. I'm just going to focus on one concept, and the concept is supply chain, both in hardware and now in software, right? The whole challenge and what happened with SolarWinds, right? And that compromise sort of has shone a light on this idea of problems within our software supply chain. Well, with edge computing, you already have a natural challenge about hardware supply chains, right? And I think in terms of US leadership, we've got to really shore up our industrial capacity to both secure for the mission of ICE and TSA and all the components of Homeland Security, our hardware supply chain. And in terms of the leadership around things like encryption technologies, just this morning, there was an announcement from Intel that they were going to start to embed logic for homomorphic encryption. I mean, I'm just kind of just pointing out just a very narrow piece technically, because both hardware supply chains and now software supply chains really, we really need a national approach to this in terms of cybersecurity, because our foreign adversaries and our rivals aren't going to let go, and they're going to start to exploit this, and we're going to be weaker as a nation, and we won't be able to deliver our services to our citizens. I mean, those are the ones we serve, and we're sworn to both protect and serve on their worst day in the case of disasters. So that's what keeps me up a little bit about worrying about whether we are going to restore that kind of technical leadership in semiconductors and in foundational technologies like quantum encryption. That's really where we really need to invest in the years ahead.
Great, thank you. So rapid fire, 30 seconds or less. I want each panelist to just sort of leave the audience with one final last piece of advice or anything that you want to leave them with. Well, let's start with Sebastian, please.
So thanks again for having me here. This was a great conversation. What I'd like to leave everybody with is that IT automation is not a big, large IT project you're used to. It's not rip and replace. It's not a forklift upgrade type project, pick your cliche. It's really easy to start small and start adding automation to improve the IT projects that you're already working on and you've already got in the works. And you will reap benefits from that, immediately, and you won't be building up the technical debt that you're used to with previous IT projects, and you'll be resolving that immediately. So my advice is to, get started and get started soon.
Sounds good. Over to you, Kathleen.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's been fun. This is a fun conversation. I would leave the audience with the fact that you always have to work in a team. So like Ted and I are a team, and Ken and I are a team, we're the CDO team. So just get that mindset and try to leverage that information you don't have. Like, no one can be an expert on everything. So just know your limitations. And like when I need Ted, I just ask him and he answers and it helps me out. And it helps out everybody. And that's what I would say.
Love that. And over to you, Ken.
Yeah, I think the last point is that, as CDOs, we're facilitators of the process. We don't necessarily own, and in most cases don't own the data. But like for me, my clients are the operators and the leadership of ICE. And you've got to have that federated approach. You got to work with them and have buy-in and collaboration. And that's important, to have a good federated approach to data management.
Great. And take us home, Ted.
Sure. Just something that Kathleen just really struck me, right? Teamwork is really key. I think Colin Powell once said, if you lead a team, the minute your people stop bringing their problems to you is the minute you stop leading them, which means building trust in that team is the coin of the realm, right? Trust is everything. Jason Miller's in this, he's one of the audience, and I actually said it on one of his panels. I'll just end with this, take care of your families. You matter, your families matter. Wear a mask. We're not out of this by a long shot. We have a long way to go. And I think, we're in the second year. It's easy to just be feeling like we're just so completely overwhelmed, but it's just a couple more months. We will get to herd immunity and we can celebrate at that time, but wear a mask, still wash your hands. All of the rules, they still work, especially for those who are older, right? If you know of anybody who doesn't have a cell phone and can't register, there are ways. I mean, it's really cool how hospitals are now reaching out to folks that actually don't have, that aren't digital natives, they don't have access. So think about your neighbors and think about your loved ones, and just continue to use all the measures that CDC has provided to the nation, and we'll get out of this together.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have, but I want to thank our partners again at Red Hat and our amazing panelists. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again later this week on Thursday for ATARC's 2021 Zero Trust Virtual Summit. So please go register, and we look forward to seeing you there.